For my flipped classroom model, I will be doing the 13 colonies. I'm aiming this lesson towards third grade, and the lesson is basically going over the regions of the 13 colonies and what colonies fall into those regions. The children will be discussing the economies of those regions and the jobs, and also the lesson touches on African slavery and how the slaves were treated in each region. So my essential questions are, how did the northeastern colonies, the middle colonies, and the southern colonies create economies? Why did each colonial group come to America? And how was the experience of the African slaves different than the experience of the colonial settlers? This is my state standard, which is from third grade PA Core Standards. Identify and describe the social, political, cultural, and economic contributions of individuals and groups in the United States history. This is my Edpuzzle class code and link to join the Edpuzzle class. The video in Edpuzzle basically goes over, it's a vocabulary video, and it talks about how each region has a different aspect of the land and what colonies fall into those regions. It talks about how in the northeastern colonies they were rich with lumber and how they were very religious. Talks about trade. It talks about just all the different ways that the colonies needed to create jobs and to create a living. It also touches on how Africans were how the African slaves were treated in each region and how they were treated differently in each region. So in our first activity called Read All About It, the students are map experts living in England, and they're commissioned by King James to create newsletters about the New World. Since you're a map expert, you have your maps in front of you to help you create them. So I would just have large maps with each region highlighted, and each region would have the colonies in them, and the colonies would be labeled so that children would have information in front of them. And this is to reinforce their knowledge of what colonies make up the groups. So the students are going to be creating newsletters on smore.com. So instead of just listing them in the newsletter, I want them to add pictures, to, maybe add a picture of what would a house look like. Just look up some pictures with teacher guidance, of course. This falls into Bloom's taxonomy level of remember and understand, because they're listing what colonies fall into each region. And Webb's DOK level is level 1 because they're listing and describing features of a land. And the TIM level this falls under is constructive learning adoption. They're constructing relationships between colonies and regions with the teacher guidance. This reinforces the students' knowledge of which colonies make up the groups. And it's not just that they have the information in front of them, but using that information and applying it in a way that's memorable can really help the students understand the regions a little bit better. So our next activity is the investigation. So the students arrive to the New World to study the landscape and decide on what jobs would be fit for each region. They're going to be traveling through stations, and the stations are going to be set up as Connecticut, New York, and Virginia, which is one colony that was selected from each region. This is going to reinforce what each region does to make an economy, to make their specific economy. So when they travel to the stations, for instance, Connecticut, when they travel to Connecticut, they're going to find things like lumber, and they're going to find things like fishing poles, boats, maybe a Bible, or some kind of religious relic. And they're going to be either in the form of pictures or tactile items. They're going to take observations using their investigator notebook. They can draw pictures or take notes. They can work with partners or in a group while doing this, but at the end of this, I want them to come together in a group or with a partner to compare their field notes. And then the students are going to display on chart paper what they've decided would be the best jobs for each region. They could do that drawing pictures, writing about it, any way they want to set that up. In Bloom's taxonomy, this falls under understanding and applying. They're identifying what is at each region and they're reporting on it, and then they are solving the problem of what job would be fit for each region. In Webb's DOK level, this is level 2, because they're inferring and making observations. They're making observations essentially about their surroundings, even though they're not technically in these places. The surroundings are being mimicked at the stations. And there's no technology factor for this, so there isn't a TIM level. For my next activity, it is essentially, this is the activity where students will be learning more about colonial slavery. I would have them watch this video, this new video about slavery in colonial America. It talks about why the African slaves were brought over and why they couldn't just run away, and it explains things in a very developmentally appropriate way. I also have attached in here the vocabulary video in case they need to rewatch that, and it's really for any of the students to rewatch it, not just the ones doing this activity. So after viewing the video about African slaves and reviewing the vocabulary video if needed, I want them to discuss with their peers that are also doing this activity what they've learned about African slaves in colonial America. And then in a group with a partner or by themselves, I want them to create a Powtoon comparing the experience of African slaves to colonial settlers. I want them to think about how their experiences were different and how they would think it would have felt like to be an African slave and how they think it would have felt like to be a colonial settler. So this enriches their knowledge of colonial slavery. Since it's something that is touched on multiple times in the vocabulary video, I thought it would be pretty much essential to include it in this activity, and pretty much essential to include in any kind of any instruction. I think that it's a very important topic to talk about that children do need to be aware of. So this falls under Bloom's taxonomy level of analyzing, because they're comparing the differences between what they thought that the experiences for African slaves and colonial settlers would be like. They're also examining different videos, different resources to inform them about the African slave trade in early America. And they're questioning themselves, they're questioning how they think it would feel like. So it really is a higher level thinking activity, because they have to be a little metacognitive. They have to try and put themselves into another person's shoes that are in a different time. So it is a difficult activity. This could definitely be scaffolded and adjusted to fit a student's needs a little bit more. You know, if they need a little bit more research, maybe a couple more videos or a story, there are many stories out there, many children's books about the African slave trade in early America. The TIM level for this one is authentic learning adoption. They're going to be using technology tools and activities to teach, and it's going to teach students about issues beyond the classroom. And for the final activity, this one is, what would your life look like as a colonial American? This falls under Bloom's taxonomy level of creating, because they're formulating and developing what they think their life would be as a colonial American. So they've arrived to the new land and they need to decide where they're going to live. So using Google Slides or another presentation tool, really any of these activities can be adapted to use a different medium or a different way of presenting their information. So they're using a presentation tool to show their life, and they're going to select one of the 13 colonies to move to, and they're just going to think about things that make up the life in that region. So what would their job be? Maybe what would their house look like? Do they practice religion? Do they think they have a large family? Do they live alone? They can include any of the information from the vocabulary video, which I mentioned again is on slide 7 if anyone would need to rewatch it. And they can do outside research to find out more about their colony. That's almost essential part of the activity. Students absolutely do not have to do outside research. However, it's extremely suggested so that they can get good ideas of what life would have been like in that region, because the video does give a good overview, but it could go much deeper than that. Webb's DOK level is level 4, and they're applying concepts and they're creating. So they're applying what they've learned about the new land, and they're applying what they learned about that specific region to their own lives. What do they think that they would be doing during that time? And they're creating a life. They're creating essentially a story about somebody living in this colony. The TIM level is constructive learning and fusion, because students can use outside research and they can select what tool they would like to use to present their information and display their learning. So lastly, if I was presenting this to my class, I would have a slide saying, don't forget to ask questions and to ask for help. And don't forget to have fun, because these activities are very hands-on. They're very, they get the kids up and moving around, and they're fun activities. I don't think that they're too it's not worksheets. It's not write me about what you know, write down the facts. This is a way to make history actually fun for kids, which some kids love history and some kids really struggle to just memorize facts, and that's not what history should be about. It should be about synthesizing information to relate it to present day. And I think that these activities build a good foundation for that, especially since the kids are so young. This is a really good way of them being able to learn about these things, but still being able to have fun with it and not just be memorizing facts and definitions. And that is it. Thank you.